I asked when they'd be getting married, and my daughter-in-law looked me right in the eye, her voice calm, almost casual, as if she were saying the most ordinary thing in the world. "We got married yesternight." For a moment, the words hung in the air like smoke that refused to vanish. My heart stopped, my breath caught in my throat, and I felt the floor beneath me tilt. Yesternight? Married? Without me, without even a single word, not even a whisper? The room seemed too small to hold the weight of what she had just confessed. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the pounding of my own heart. I could see her face, steady, unshaken, while mine burned with a mix of shock and disbelief. And in that moment, I knew. Something was terribly wrong. Something I had not seen coming. Something I had been blind to until now. But before I tell you what happened next, before I reveal how an old woman's simple question tore open a wound so deep it would change my family forever, let me take you back to where it all began. Because every storm has its first drop of rain, and this one started long before that shocking night. And while I tell you this story, I need you to listen carefully. Pay attention to every detail, because nothing here happened by accident. Every choice, every silence, every act of kindness, or lack of it, carried us closer to this moment. And as I share it, ask yourself, if you were in my place, what would you have done? Would you have seen the truth earlier? Or would you have been just as blind as I was until it was too late? Before I go further, let me remind you, subscribe now and leave a comment below, also your location, because I want to hear what you think. What would you do if the woman your son loved suddenly told you they married in secret? Would you forgive, or would you walk away? Think about it. Now, let's go back. I am Margaret, a 71-year-old widow living in the quiet outskirts of Chicago. My husband David passed away 5 years ago, leaving me with memories of a marriage built on loyalty and sacrifice. We were not rich, but we were content. Life taught me early that kindness was the only wealth worth keeping. Even when neighbors turned cold or friends became scarce, I tried to show compassion, because I believed kindness always came back, though not always from the people you gave it to. My son, Michael, was my pride. Tall, hard-working, with a sharp mind and a heart that I once believed could never be led astray. I raised him alone after David died, pouring into him every lesson I had learned about honesty, love, and respect. When he graduated from college, I felt my heart swell with joy, convinced that everything I had endured had been worth it. But life has a way of surprising you. Sometimes kindness is mistaken for weakness. Sometimes love blinds you. And sometimes family, the very people you trust most, hide truths so heavy they crush you when they finally come out. Michael met her 2 years ago. Her name was Rachel. A lovely young woman at first glance. Charming smile, soft voice, and eyes that sparkled like the morning sun. I remember the first time he brought her home, how she carried herself with grace, how quickly she won over the neighbors with her laughter. But something inside me, quiet but firm, whispered caution. It wasn't that she was unkind or rude. No, she was polite, almost too polite. But there was a distance in her eyes, a wall she kept firmly built, even when she smiled. Still, Michael was in love, and what mother could deny her son happiness? I told myself it was nothing, that I was only seeing shadows, because I was protective. So, I embraced her, welcomed her into my home, and tried to believe that the family I had prayed for was finally within reach. The months passed, and though they grew closer, I noticed the way Michael changed. He laughed less with me. He visited less often, sometimes only answering my calls days later. Rachel became his world, and slowly I felt myself fading into the background. Yet, I said nothing. I told myself this was how it was meant to be. Children grow, They love, they leave. It is the circle of life. But deep inside, I missed him. I missed the boy who once sat with me on the porch, sipping lemonade on summer nights, sharing his dreams. I missed the son who used to call me his best friend. And then, it began. Small things at first. A visit cut short without explanation. A family dinner canceled at the last minute. Excuses, too many to count, too thin to believe. And through it all, Rachel's eyes never gave anything away. Calm, steady, unreadable. I thought it was just the rush of young love. I thought perhaps I was being too needy, too expectant. So, I stayed quiet. Until last week. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening. The sky was clear, and the autumn breeze carried the smell of falling leaves. I had invited them for dinner. Nothing fancy, just roast chicken and potatoes, the way Michael always loved it. They arrived later than promised, and when they finally walked through the door, I could feel something in the air. Michael looked tired, distracted, while Rachel's smile seemed forced, almost painted on. We ate in silence for most of the evening, the clinking of forks against plates louder than our words. And as I sat there, staring at the two of them, my heart grew restless. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. That's when I asked, gently, casually, as though it were just another question. So, when will you two be getting married? I expected laughter, maybe a shrug, maybe even an argument about dates and venues. But I never expected her answer. Her lips parted, and she spoke with that same calm voice, steady as ever. We got married yesternight. The fork slipped from my hand, hitting the plate with a sharp clang. My breath caught. My vision blurred. I stared at her, then at Michael, waiting for him to laugh, to shake his head, to tell me she was joking. But he said nothing. His silence was louder than thunder, heavier than stone. In that moment, the world I thought I knew collapsed. And just as I opened my mouth to speak, just as I tried to find the strength to demand why, the front door rattled loudly, as though someone was trying to break it open. The door rattled again, harder this time, as if someone out there was determined to break through. My heart jumped into my throat, my hands trembling against the table. The plates clattered, the roast chicken untouched, and silence gripped us tighter than a noose. I looked at Michael, but his eyes darted away from mine, cold and unreadable. Rachel's face didn't flinch. She sat there calm, too calm, her gaze locked on the door like she had been expecting this moment. For a second, I thought it might be the wind. But no. This was different. The sound was heavy, deliberate, human. Someone wanted to come inside. I rose slowly, my old bones aching as I pushed myself up from the chair, and with each step toward the door, the rattling grew more violent. My breath grew shorter, my knees weak. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head. Was it a neighbor in trouble, a stranger, or someone far more dangerous? I reached for the knob, but before my hand touched it, the rattling stopped. The silence was sudden and suffocating. Whoever it was, they had either gone or were standing right there, waiting, listening. I pressed my ear to the wood, straining to catch even the faintest sound, but all I heard was the wild beating of my own heart. I turned back to them. Michael's face was pale, his jaw tight, but still he said nothing. Rachel, however, leaned back in her chair, her arms folded across her chest, and something about the way she sat there, as though she were untouched by the fear that was choking me, made my skin crawl. I locked the door. My hand lingered on the knob, my body frozen for a moment longer before I forced myself to walk back to the table. I needed answers, and I needed them now. But then, just as I opened my mouth to speak, Rachel broke the silence. "It's nothing to worry about," she said softly. Too softly. Her tone was steady, almost rehearsed. "Sometimes people knock on the wrong door. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was. Not like this, not with rattling that shook the whole frame. Still, I forced myself to sit down, gripping the edge of the chair as though it could hold me together. The night dragged on after that, heavy and suffocating. We ate in silence again, though I could hardly taste the food. My thoughts were trapped in a whirlwind, married in secret, a door rattling in the night, my son's silence, and a daughter-in-law who seemed far too calm for her own good. When they finally left, I stood at the window and watched them walk away. Michael held Rachel's hand tightly, his steps quick, like a man running from something he couldn't name. The street was dark, the lamps flickering, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed the start of something I would not be able to stop. The house was too quiet after they left. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the trees outside, made me flinch. I tried to distract myself, washed the dishes, folded the napkins, tidied the kitchen, but no matter what I did, I kept hearing her voice. "We got married yesternight." The words replayed in my mind like a broken record, each repetition slicing deeper into me. And then, as I finally sat on the couch, clutching my shawl around my shoulders, I remembered something. Earlier that day, I had passed by the small church on Willow Street, the one Michael and I used to attend when he was a boy. Its lights had been on late into the night, unusual for a weekday. I thought nothing of it then. But now, could it be? Could it be that the lights were for them? Was that where it happened? The thought chilled me to the bone, because if it was true, it meant they had planned everything behind my back, hiding it from me, from everyone. I barely slept that night, my mind wrestling with questions I could not answer. By morning, the sun rose bright and clear, but inside me there was no light. Only suspicion. Only the echo of her calm voice and my son's silence. So, I did what any mother would do. I decided to find out the truth for myself. I dressed in my simple coat, tied my scarf around my head, and walked down to Willow Street. The church stood there, its doors shut, the morning air quiet around it. As I stepped closer, I noticed something on the ground near the steps, a scattering of flower petals, white and red, fresh, as if they had been dropped only hours ago. My stomach turned. I reached for the church door. It opened with a slow creak, the smell of candle wax still lingering inside. My eyes swept across the pews, the altar, the small table set for communion. And then I saw it. A folded paper resting on the front pew. I walked toward it, my hands shaking as I reached down to pick it up. It was a program, a wedding program, and printed right there, in bold letters, were their names, Michael and Rachel. The date was yesterday. The proof was right before my eyes. And just as my heart sank into the pit of my stomach, just as my knees threatened to give way, I heard a sound. From the back of the church. A door creaking open slowly, followed by footsteps coming closer. The footsteps echoed across the old wooden floor, slow and heavy, like someone who wanted me to know they were there. My throat tightened, and my hands clutched the wedding program so tightly the paper crumpled in my grip. I turned toward the sound, my heart racing faster with every step that drew nearer. The church was dim, the morning sun spilling through colored glass, painting streaks of red and blue on the walls. And from the shadow of the side hallway, a figure appeared. It was the pastor. His tall frame filled the narrow aisle, his eyes fixed on me with something unreadable, caught between surprise and discomfort. For a moment, relief washed over me. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't someone breaking in. But the way he looked at me, as if I was standing where I didn't belong, made my knees shake. "Mrs. Turner," he said, his voice low, hesitant, almost guilty. He knew. The way he said my name, the way his eyes darted to the paper in my hand, told me everything. He had been there last night. He had witnessed it all. But before I could ask him anything, Before I could demand why I was left in the dark, he placed a hand on the back of a pew and sighed deeply. "You shouldn't be here." The words hit me like a slap. Shouldn't be here? This was the church where I raised my son in faith, where I prayed for my husband's soul, where I gave my tithe even when I had little. And now I was being told I had no place here, in the very sanctuary I helped keep alive. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "Pastor, tell me the truth. Did my son get married here last night?" He looked at me for a long moment, and in his silence, I already had my answer. The calm of his face, the pity in his eyes. It was enough. My chest grew heavy, but I forced myself to stand tall. "Why wasn't I told?" I whispered, my voice cracking. But instead of answering, he turned his gaze toward the stained glass window, his jaw tight. "Some things," he muttered, "are decided without us. Sometimes, it is better not to know everything." Better not to know. My lips trembled, anger sparking in my chest. Better not to know? Was I nothing to them now? Was I so small, so unworthy, that my only son, the boy I gave my life to, thought I didn't deserve to see him wed? The weight of it crushed me, but I forced myself to breathe. My hands trembled as I laid the program back on the pew. I walked slowly down the aisle, past the pastor who refused to meet my eyes, and stepped back into the cold morning air. The sky had grown gray, a thin drizzle beginning to fall, dampening my scarf. For a moment, I stood there on the church steps, letting the rain wash over me, cooling the fire of anger in my chest. I remembered all the nights I had stayed awake praying for Michael, all the sacrifices I made, all the ways I had shown kindness even when my own heart was breaking. And now this. I walked home in silence, every step heavy, my heart dragging behind me like a burden I could no longer carry. By the time I reached my door, the drizzle had turned into rain and my clothes were damp. I made myself some tea, sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me, the one David used to sit in. If he were here, what would he say? Would he tell me to forgive? Or would he stand up for me, demanding answers, demanding respect? I sipped the tea slowly, the warmth calming my shivering hands. For a moment, the house felt peaceful again, the storm in my mind beginning to quiet. But peace never stays long. Because as I set my cup down, I heard it, sliding against the floor near the front door. A faint scrape, like paper being slipped under. I froze, my eyes locked on the crack at the bottom of the door. Slowly, I rose and walked over, my heart thudding. I bent down, my hand trembling as I picked it up. It was an envelope, plain, white, sealed tight, my name written across the front in bold black letters. Margaret. And on the back, in neat handwriting, 3 words that made my blood run cold. Do not interfere. The envelope trembled in my hands as though it carried the weight of 100 unspoken threats. I stared at those 3 words, do not interfere, my vision blurring, my chest tightening as if invisible fingers were closing around my throat. Who had written it? Who had slipped it under my door? The handwriting was neat, deliberate, not rushed like someone leaving a casual note. No, this was planned. Someone wanted me to know that my questions, my curiosity, my presence, were not welcome. I sank into the chair, the envelope still clutched between my fingers. My home, once my safe place, no longer felt safe at all. My son's silence, Rachel's calmness, the rattling door, the footsteps in the church. Everything suddenly twisted together like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't asked to solve. Tears filled my eyes, hot and bitter. I thought of Michael as a boy, how he used to leave me little notes in his messy handwriting. I love you, Mom, scrawled on scraps of paper. And now, this note, a warning, a command, written in a stranger's hand, but tied somehow to him. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march straight to Michael's home, pound on the door, and demand the truth. But I couldn't. Because deep inside, I was afraid. Afraid that if I pushed too hard, I would lose him completely. So I placed the envelope in the drawer by the kitchen sink and locked it away. Out of sight, but never out of mind. The next morning came quietly, as if the world outside had no idea of the storm inside me. The sun rose over the rooftops, the birds chirped, and neighbors walked their dogs as though nothing unusual had happened. I forced myself into routine, made oatmeal, swept the porch, watered the plants. Small acts of normalcy to keep me from unraveling. But every shadow on the street made me glance over my shoulder. Every sound at the door made my heart leap. I started to wonder if I was being watched, if eyes were following me even when I couldn't see them. By afternoon, I decided I needed air. I walked to the corner store for milk, nodding politely to Mrs. Howard, who was leaving with her groceries. She smiled, asked how I was doing, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. Instead, I lied, saying everything was fine. People never really want the heavy answers anyway. Back home, I sat by the window, sipping tea, staring at the world moving on as though mine hadn't shattered. I tried to remind myself of the lessons David always repeated when life grew heavy. Choose kindness, even when it hurts. Never let bitterness take your heart hostage. So I tried. I prayed. I whispered forgiveness even when I didn't feel it. I told myself love was stronger than secrecy, stronger than lies. Hours passed, and as evening fell, I lit a candle by the window, the soft glow calming me. For a while, the silence in the house felt peaceful again, and I began to believe maybe, just maybe, I could survive this storm. But peace once again did not last. Because just as I leaned back in my chair, I noticed something outside. Parked across the street, half hidden beneath the shadow of an old oak tree, was a black car. Its engine off, its windows tinted dark. And in the driver's seat, I could just barely make out the shape of a man. He wasn't moving. He wasn't leaving. He was watching. The car sat there like a shadow that refused to fade. The longer I stared, the more certain I became. It wasn't just passing by. It wasn't waiting for someone else. It was here for me. I pulled the curtain back just slightly, careful not to let the man know I was watching him, though a part of me wondered if he already knew. His head was turned toward my house, his stillness unsettling, like a hunter waiting for his prey to make the first move. My heart raced. Who was he? What did he want? Did he know about the envelope? Was he the one who had slipped it under my door? For nearly an hour, the car didn't move. I paced the living room, my feet restless, my hands wringing together until they ached. I thought about calling the police. But what would I say? There's a car outside my house and I don't like the look of it? They would laugh, or worse, dismiss me as an old woman letting her imagination run wild. So I did nothing. I waited. And just as the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange and pink, the engine of the black car roared to life. Slowly, it rolled down the street, turning the corner until it disappeared from sight. I should have felt relief, but instead, I felt emptiness. Because the man may have left, but the questions remained. That night, I tried to sleep, but every sound made me jolt awake. The creak of the old house, the bark of a distant dog, the wind pressing against the window. It all felt louder, heavier, filled with meaning it shouldn't have had. When sleep finally came, it was shallow, restless, broken by dreams I couldn't understand. The next morning, I decided to focus on something simple, something that might bring me back to myself. I went into the kitchen and baked. Banana bread, Michael's favorite. The smell filled the house, warm and sweet, wrapping me in a comfort I hadn't felt in days. I told myself I would take it to him later, as a peace offering, as a reminder that no matter what secrets he kept, I was still his mother, and my love would not die so easily. When the bread cooled, I wrapped it carefully in foil, slid it into a basket, and began the walk toward Michael's place. The streets were busy, children riding bikes, neighbors chatting on porches. For a while, I let myself pretend everything was normal. But when I turned onto his block, my steps slowed. Something was wrong. Michael's front door was wide open. I froze on the sidewalk, my hands tightening around the basket until the foil crinkled. The house was still, eerily quiet, the kind of silence that didn't belong in a home. I stepped closer, my heart hammering in my chest. The doorframe bore fresh scratches, like someone had forced their way in. My throat went dry, my breath shallow, but I couldn't stop myself. I crossed the threshold. Inside, the living room was a mess. Cushions tossed aside, drawers yanked open, papers scattered across the floor. A lamp lay shattered in the corner. My knees nearly gave out, but I forced myself forward. "Michael?" I whispered, my voice trembling, though I knew he wasn't there. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a break-in. This was deliberate. Someone had been searching for something. And then, from the kitchen, I heard it. A single cough. Low, male, alive. Someone was still inside. The cough froze me where I stood. My body stiffened, my breath shallow, my fingers tightening around the handle of the basket until it nearly snapped. Someone was in Michael's house, still there, still moving. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart beating so hard I feared it would give me away. My mind raced. Should I run? Should I scream? Should I confront whoever it was? My legs felt weak, but my mother's instinct roared louder than fear. This was my son's home, and whoever had broken into it had no right to be here. Slowly, carefully, I crept closer to the kitchen doorway. The floorboards betrayed me, creaking beneath my steps, and the cough came again, sharper this time, followed by the faint sound of a drawer slamming shut. I peeked around the corner. There he was. A man dressed in dark clothing, tall, broad-shouldered, his back to me as he rifled through Michael's cabinets. His movements were rough, hurried, like someone desperate to find something valuable or dangerous. I swallowed hard, the air catching in my throat. For a moment, I considered slipping out quietly, running down the street and calling for help. But before I could make up my mind, the basket slipped from my trembling hands, crashing onto the floor with a loud clang. The man spun around, our eyes locked, cold, piercing. The kind of eyes that didn't flinch, didn't soften. He stared at me for what felt like forever, then straightened to his full height, towering over me even from across the room. I couldn't speak. My lips moved, but no sound came out. My hands shook as I backed away, step by step, toward the door. And then, he smiled. Not a kind smile. Not a nervous smile. A slow, deliberate curl of his lips that made my blood run cold. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low, steady, and terrifyingly calm. I froze. My knees weakened, but I forced myself to stand tall. "This is my son's house," I managed to whisper, though my voice trembled. The man tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. For a long, heavy moment, he said nothing. Then, without warning, he stepped closer, his boots thudding against the floor, each one pulling me deeper into panic. But just as he reached the doorway, just as I thought he might grab me, he stopped. He slipped something into his pocket, a folded paper, and brushed past me, walking straight out the front door as if he owned the place. I stood frozen, my body pressed against the wall, listening to his footsteps fade into the distance. When I finally gathered the strength to move, I rushed into the kitchen, searching for what he might have been after. The drawers were empty, the cabinets ransacked, but on the counter, I found something that made my hands shake even harder. A photograph. It was of Michael and Rachel, smiling, holding hands, standing in front of the very church I had visited the day before. But it wasn't the photo itself that chilled me. It was what had been written across the bottom in black ink, bold and deliberate. She belongs to us now. My fingers trembled as I held the photograph. The ink was still fresh, smudging at the edges as though it had only just been written. She belongs to us now. The words carved themselves into my mind, repeating over and over until my knees gave way. I sank into the chair at the kitchen table, clutching the photo to my chest. Who were they? And what did they want with Rachel? The image of the man's cold smile burned in my memory. He hadn't looked rushed when he left. He hadn't run or panicked like a thief caught in the act. No, he had walked out with the quiet certainty of someone who knew he could come back whenever he pleased. That thought alone nearly broke me. I pressed my trembling hands against the table, forcing myself to think. Should I call the police? Should I tell Michael what I had seen? My lips quivered at the thought. How could I explain that I had stood face to face with an intruder who left a warning that sounded like a threat? And worse, how could I protect Rachel? I rose unsteadily to my feet, my eyes scanning the ransacked kitchen once more. That's when I noticed it. The back door. It was locked, from the inside. My chest tightened. That man hadn't broken in. He had been inside the house already. A shiver ran through me, so strong I had to grip the counter to steady myself. If he could come and go without forcing a door or window, then Michael's home, Rachel's home, wasn't safe at all. Tears stung my eyes, but I fought them back. I would not collapse. Not now. I tucked the photo carefully into my coat pocket and stumbled out of the house, locking the door behind me, though it felt meaningless. My legs carried me down the street, but I barely noticed where I was going. Each face I passed seemed suspicious. Each shadow stretched longer, darker, more sinister. By the time I reached my own house, the sun was sinking low, bleeding orange across the sky. I shut the door firmly, bolted it, and leaned against it, breathless. Then, I pulled the photograph from my pocket to study it again. But this time, I noticed something I had missed before. In the corner of the picture, just behind Michael and Rachel, was the faint reflection of a figure in the church window. Not a photographer, not a passerby. A shadow, watching them. And as I stared harder, my stomach twisted with dread, because the shadow's shape, the sharp shoulders, the tilt of the head, it was unmistakable. It was the same man who had just stood in Michael's kitchen. Sleep would not come that night. I sat in my armchair with the photograph spread across my lap, the lamp casting a weak glow over the living room. Every tick of the clock hammered into my skull. Midnight came and went, yet I stayed awake, staring, searching for answers hidden in the grain of that glossy paper. Who was he? Why target Rachel? Why leave a message meant for me? I thought of calling Michael. I even picked up the phone twice, my finger hovering over his number. But both times I stopped. How could I burden him with this? He looked so happy earlier, so full of pride beside his new bride. If I told him now, would he believe me? Or would he think grief and loneliness had twisted my mind into shadows? No. I needed proof. Something undeniable. So I made a choice that would forever change everything. At dawn, I slipped on my old trench coat and left the house with the photograph folded in my purse. My destination was clear. The church. The place where that wedding, hidden from me, stolen from me, had taken place. The place where the shadow first appeared. The church stood silent when I arrived. Its doors unlocked, its pews empty, its windows filtering weak morning light onto the stone floor. My shoes echoed across the aisle as I walked to the altar. I could almost hear laughter still lingering in the walls. Rachel's dress sweeping the floor, Michael's hand clutching hers. And somewhere, behind it all, the watchful eyes of that man. I searched every corner, every window frame. Dust clung to the air, stirred by my movements. My heart pounded as I stepped toward the sacristy, a room I hadn't entered since Michael's confirmation years ago. And there, tucked in the crack of the wooden door, I found it. Another photograph. This one showed only Rachel, sitting alone in a pew, her eyes downcast. And again, scrawled across the bottom in the same jagged handwriting were words that sent ice through my veins. She has no idea. My knees nearly buckled. I gripped the pew for balance, my breath ragged. Someone had staged this, left it here for me to find. But why? Was it a warning? A threat? Or a game? I stumbled out of the sacristy, clutching the photo to my chest. For a moment, I leaned against the altar, my body shaking. A less extreme thought passed through me. Maybe I should tell the priest. Maybe I should confess everything. But my words caught in my throat. How could I explain the truth when I barely understood it myself? I needed answers. Real answers. So I pulled the photos from my purse, laid them side by side on the wooden altar, and studied them. And that's when I saw something I had overlooked before. The man wasn't just watching. In both pictures, his reflection seemed closer, moving nearer, tracking her. And just as the realization struck me, the sound of a creaking floorboard echoed through the empty church. I wasn't alone. The creak of the floorboard froze me in place. My hand flew to my chest as if pressing hard enough could steady the wild pounding beneath my ribs. The church was supposed to be empty. At this hour, no services, no choir practice, no reason for anyone to be here. Yet the sound was unmistakable. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from the far aisle. I gathered the photographs quickly, tucking them back into my coat pocket. My eyes darted toward the main doors, but something told me that running would be useless. Whoever was here had probably been watching me since I walked inside. I sank into the nearest pew, crouching low, praying the shadows would conceal me. My breath came shallow, each inhale burning like fire in my lungs. Then I saw him. A tall figure, moving slowly down the center aisle. His stride was measured, his head tilted slightly as though he were searching. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dim light, but I knew, deep in my bones, it was him. The same man. The same intruder. The man paused near the altar, not 5 feet from where I hid. My fingers dug into the polished wood of the pew until they ached. He stood there in silence for what felt like an eternity, his back to me, staring at the same spot where I had laid the photographs moments earlier. Then, without turning, his voice cut through the stillness. "You shouldn't be here." My heart lurched. He knew. I fought the urge to answer, to defend myself, but fear clamped down on my throat. The man tilted his head, listening, as if waiting for me to move. Then, with a quiet chuckle, he stepped forward toward the sacristy door. The sound of his footsteps faded, swallowed by the silence of the church. I stayed crouched, too afraid to breathe, until the minutes stretched unbearably long. Finally, when I thought he was gone, I rose slowly from the pew, my body trembling. I had to get out. Now. But as I turned toward the main doors, I stopped dead in my tracks. Pinned to the inside of the church door with a rusted nail was a third photograph. My stomach flipped as I stepped closer, the wooden floor creaking beneath me. It wasn't of Rachel this time. It was of me. Standing outside my house just last night. And across the bottom, in the same jagged handwriting, "You're next." The photograph slipped from my hands and fluttered to the ground like a dead leaf. My knees threatened to give way, but I forced myself to stand, to move, to escape before the walls of that church closed in on me completely. I grabbed the heavy wooden doors, pulled them open, and stumbled into the daylight. The air outside was crisp, but it did nothing to clear the fog of terror in my mind. I walked quickly down the steps, looking over my shoulder with every few paces, expecting at any moment to see that tall figure emerging from the shadows. The streets were quiet, but my heart refused to believe I was alone. I hurried home, clutching my coat tightly around me, the photographs burning like fire against my chest. Each step felt like a race against time, as if the man's eyes were following me, measuring every movement, waiting for me to falter. By the time I reached my house, I was nearly breathless. I fumbled with the keys, glancing around the neighborhood. Curtains swayed in a nearby window. A car idled at the corner, engine running but no driver in sight. Every detail became a threat, every shadow a possible trap. Finally, I shoved the door open, locked it behind me, and leaned against it, panting. For a long while, I stayed still, listening. Only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock in the hallway filled the silence. Slowly, my pulse began to steady. I pulled the photos from my coat and spread them across the dining table. My hands shook as I studied them. Rachel with her head bowed, Michael smiling at the altar, and me, caught unaware outside my own home. This was no coincidence. Someone had been following us, photographing us, studying us. But why? I pressed my palms flat against the table, fighting the tears rising in my throat. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It was about me, too. And if the note was to be believed, I was now part of whatever sick game this man was playing. A quieter thought flickered through me then. Maybe I wasn't meant to protect Rachel at all. Maybe the message was meant to isolate me, to make me look paranoid, unstable. If I told Michael or anyone else, would they even believe me? I rubbed my temples, exhausted, and finally dragged myself upstairs. My body screamed for rest, though my mind still buzzed with fear. But as I entered my bedroom, the sight that greeted me stopped me cold. On my pillow lay a single white envelope, and scrawled across the front, in that same jagged handwriting, was my name. Margaret. For a long time I couldn't move. I just stood there at the edge of the bed, staring at that envelope lying so casually on my pillow. My name was written in the same jagged scrawl that haunted the photographs. He had been here, in my room. The thought made my skin crawl. I sat down slowly, the mattress dipping beneath me, and reached for the envelope. My fingers hovered over it, trembling. Should I open it? What if it was another message, another threat? Or worse, what if it was something that proved I'd already lost? Finally, I tore the flap open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. I unfolded it, my breath catching as I read the words. You can't protect them. She is mine. And soon, you will be too. The paper slipped from my hands and floated to the floor. My chest tightened, tears brimming at the edges of my eyes. What kind of madness was this? Who was this man? And what did he want with Rachel? Or me? I pressed my fists to my mouth, rocking back and forth. The house was silent, but that silence no longer comforted me. It pressed in on me, heavy, suffocating. A less extreme thought crossed my mind. Maybe I should go to the police, hand over the photographs and the letter. Maybe I could still find safety in their protection. But another, darker thought cut through. What if he was already watching them too? What if walking into that station only led him closer to Michael and Rachel? I gathered the photos and letter, shoved them back into my purse, and stood. I needed air. I needed space to think. But as I turned toward the door, something caught my eye. The window. The curtains fluttered faintly, though the glass was shut. My pulse raced as I crept closer. I reached out slowly, fingertips brushing the fabric aside. And there, etched crudely into the condensation on the glass, were 3 words written with a fingertip from the inside. Turn around now. My body went cold. I spun on my heel and froze. Standing in the doorway of my bedroom, tall and shadowed, was the man himself. My scream caught in my throat, swallowed by terror. He filled the doorway, tall and broad, his shadow stretching across the floor like a stain that swallowed everything it touched. For the first time, I saw his face clearly. Sharp cheekbones, hollow eyes, lips curved in a smirk that carried no warmth. "I told you," he said softly, almost kindly. "You shouldn't be here." My knees weakened, but I forced myself to stand tall. "What do you want from me?" I managed, though my voice cracked like dry wood. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate, until the faint light from the lamp caught the edge of his smile. "It's not about you, Margaret. It never was. But you made it about you when you refused to let go, when you kept asking questions." My breath quickened. He knew my name. He knew my life. "You leave Rachel alone," I whispered, clutching my purse against me as though it could shield me. "You leave my family alone!" He tilted his head, amused. Family. Such a fragile word. She chose her path. She chose him. But you couldn't accept it. His words sliced deep, stirring every doubt that had been clawing at my mind since that night. Was it true? Had I let my own bitterness, my own loneliness, drag me into this nightmare? But no. The photographs, the notes, the letter. This was no invention of grief. "Why me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why Rachel? What do you want?" The man's smirk widened into something darker. He leaned closer, lowering his voice until it was barely a whisper. "Because she already belongs to us. And when the time comes, so will you." He slipped something from his coat pocket and placed it gently on the nightstand beside my bed. A small velvet box. Black, worn, almost rotting at the edges. Then he straightened, his eyes locking onto mine. "Open it when you're ready. But remember, Margaret, every choice has a price." And just like that, he stepped backward into the hall. I lunged after him, but the hallway was empty. The house was silent once more. Only the velvet box remained, sitting by my bed, waiting. My hands shook as I reached for it, every part of me screaming not to. Yet some force stronger than fear pulled me closer. I slid the lid open and gasped. Inside, nestled against the dark velvet, was a silver wedding band, Rachel's wedding band. The silver band glittered weakly in the lamplight, a cruel sparkle that made my breath falter. My hands trembled so violently I nearly dropped the box. This wasn't possible. I had seen the ring on Rachel's finger that morning when she waved at me from the car. I remembered the way it caught the sunlight, the pride in her smile as she slipped her hand through Michael's. And now, here it was, in my bedroom. How? My pulse roared in my ears as I closed the box and pressed it against my chest. 1,000 thoughts battled for control in my mind. Had Rachel given it up willingly? Had she taken it off and handed it over to him? Or, my heart clenched tighter, had he taken it from her by force? I stumbled backward until I hit the bed, collapsing onto the mattress. The weight of the box pressed down on me as though it carried more than just a ring. It carried secrets, threats, promises I didn't understand. I thought about calling Michael, telling him everything, but the words refused to come. How could I explain that his wife's wedding band had appeared in my room, delivered by a man who vanished into thin air? He would dismiss me, maybe even accuse me of planting it myself. No, if I involved Michael now, I risked losing him too. I needed to find Rachel. Alone. The thought steadied me for a moment. I clutched the box tighter, slid it into my coat pocket, and paced the room. My mind replayed every detail of the past 2 days. The photographs, the man, his words. She already belongs to us. But what did that mean? I stopped pacing and pulled the curtains aside, staring out into the night. The street was empty, save for a single streetlight flickering in the distance. A chill ran down my spine as I realized how quiet everything had become. Too quiet. I turned back toward the bed and froze. The velvet box lay open on the nightstand. But I hadn't left it there. I had pocketed it. My hands flew to my coat, fumbling through the pocket where I had placed it just moments before. Empty. The box was back on the nightstand. The ring was gone. And in its place was a folded scrap of paper. I reached for it with shaking hands, unfolding it slowly. The handwriting instantly familiar. "She's not where you think." My throat tightened as I read the words again. If Rachel wasn't with Michael, then where was she? I sat on the edge of the bed, the scrap of paper trembling in my hands. "She's not where you think." The words echoed in my mind like a warning or a taunt. Either way, I couldn't ignore it. For too long, I had been reacting, shaken, frightened, retreating into fear. But now, staring at that note, I realized I had no choice but to act. If Rachel was in danger, if she wasn't safe with Michael, then waiting would only make things worse. I slipped on my coat, tucked the photographs and the letter into my purse, and made my way to the car. The streets were dark and empty, but I gripped the steering wheel tightly, forcing myself forward. Every mile I drove toward Michael's house, dread grew heavier in my stomach. When I arrived, the house looked peaceful. The porch light glowed warmly. Curtains were drawn in the windows. From the outside, nothing seemed amiss. For a moment, I almost convinced myself that the note had been another cruel trick, meant to rattle me. But then I saw it. A single curtain on the second floor shifted ever so slightly, as though someone had been standing there, watching. I climbed the steps, heart racing, and knocked firmly on the door. It was Rachel who answered. Her face appeared in the doorway, pale and tired, her smile faint. Relief flooded through me so strongly that my knees nearly buckled. "Rachel," I whispered. "Thank God." She opened the door wider, gesturing me inside. "Margaret, what are you doing here? It's late." I stepped into the living room, my eyes scanning every corner, searching for signs of intrusion, for anything out of place. The house smelled faintly of lavender, the same as always. Yet something about Rachel's posture unsettled me. Her shoulders stiff, her eyes avoiding mine. I needed to see you," I said carefully, "to make sure you were all right." Rachel laughed softly, but it sounded hollow, rehearsed. "Of course I'm all right. Why wouldn't I be?" Her hand brushed against her dress as she spoke, and that's when I noticed it. Her wedding band was gone. My breath caught. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Your ring. Where is it?" Rachel froze. For a split second, her smile faltered and her eyes darkened with something I couldn't name. Then she forced another smile. Too wide, too quick. "Oh, I must have misplaced it. You know how clumsy I can be." But Rachel had never been careless. She cherished that ring as though it were sacred. Before I could press further, a sound drifted from upstairs. Floorboards creaking. Slow, heavy steps. Rachel's head snapped toward the staircase, her face suddenly tense. Then, just as quickly, she turned back to me, her smile returning like a mask sliding back into place. "You should go, Margaret," she said firmly, her voice colder now. "It's late. You need rest." And behind her words, I heard it again. Footsteps descending the stairs. Margaret planted her feet firmly on the polished floor of the restaurant, her fists tightening at her sides. The hum of whispered voices and clinking glasses around her faded into silence, as if the entire room was holding its breath. The manager, trembling but stubborn, pointed toward the exit once more. "Please, Mrs. Turner. I'll ask you one last time. Leave, before this gets ugly." But Margaret's voice, steady and cold as steel, cut through the air. "No, not until I see who's hiding upstairs." Gasps echoed through the restaurant. Her words were sharp enough to slice through the manager's flimsy excuses. The manager's face drained of color. "That's not your concern," he stammered, blocking her path to the staircase. But Margaret's eyes never wavered. She took one step forward, then another, each heel striking the floor like a war drum. The tension tightened around the room like a noose. "Move," she said firmly. Her voice carried the weight of a mother who had already lost too much to lies and manipulation. The manager hesitated, his lips trembled, his hand twitching like he wanted to grab her arm but couldn't bring himself to do it. Margaret tilted her head slightly. "You think I don't know? I heard the footsteps. I know someone's up there." Her words rattled him. His eyes flicked toward the ceiling for just a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but Margaret caught it. Without waiting another moment, she shoved past him. The manager reached out, but his courage failed when Margaret's glare burned into him. She stormed toward the stairs. The crowd whispered louder now, curiosity rippling through the diners. "Who's upstairs? Is she telling the truth? Why won't the manager stop her properly?" Margaret's hand landed on the banister. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but her resolve only deepened. The manager's voice cracked in desperation behind her. "You don't understand what you're walking into." Margaret shot him a sharp look over her shoulder. "No, you don't understand what happens when you try to keep the truth from a mother." And with that, she began climbing the staircase, each step a rebellion against every barrier that had been placed in her path. At the top, a shadow shifted behind a door. Margaret froze, her breath catching in her throat. Someone was waiting, someone who didn't want to be found. And as her hand reached for the doorknob, she whispered to herself, "Whoever you are, this ends tonight." Margaret's fingers curled around the cold brass doorknob. Her chest rose and fell, each breath heavier than the last. Behind that door was the answer, the truth everyone had been trying to keep from her. She twisted the knob. The door creaked open. And there, sitting in the dimly lit room, was her son, David. Alive, shaken, but very much real. Margaret's knees nearly buckled. For weeks she had been tormented with half-truths, denials, and shadows. But now, before her eyes, was the boy she had fought tooth and nail to protect. "Mom!" David's voice was hoarse, filled with guilt. Margaret rushed to him, clutching his face in her hands, tears streaming freely. "They told me you were gone. They made me believe you were dead," she cried, her voice breaking. David's eyes darted nervously toward the door. "You shouldn't have come here. They said it was for my safety, that if you knew, everything would fall apart." Margaret shook her head fiercely. "No lie is worth destroying a family. They tried to bury you in secrecy, but I will never let them bury the truth." The manager appeared in the doorway, his face pale and defeated. He looked as though every ounce of fight had been drained from him. "It wasn't my choice," he said softly, almost pleading. "I was told to keep him here, to protect him. Orders came from higher up. If word spread, if the wrong people knew he survived—" Margaret cut him off, her voice low and sharp. "You don't cage the living to keep them safe. You've only trapped him in fear." The manager lowered his head, shame washing over him. Margaret turned back to David, gripping his shoulders firmly. "You're coming home with me, tonight. No more secrets, no more hiding." David hesitated, fear still clouding his eyes. But then he saw the fire in his mother's gaze, the same fire that had carried her through every locked door and every whispered threat. And slowly, he nodded. As Margaret led him down the stairs, the restaurant fell into stunned silence. The diners parted like waves, whispering in disbelief, their eyes locked on the mother who had defied everyone to claim her truth. When they reached the door, Margaret turned back one final time. Her voice, steady and unyielding, rang out across the room. "You can bury lies, but the truth will always rise, and I will always be there to drag it into the light." With that, she pushed open the door, stepping out into the night with her son at her side. And for the first time in a long time, Margaret felt the weight of fear begin to lift. The storm was over. The truth had won. And that's where we leave it. For now. But here's the question for you. If you were Margaret, would you drag David out of that room no matter the danger? Or would you stop and hear what the hidden figure had to say first? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the shocking next chapter. Because trust me, this story is only just beginning.